I begrudgingly earn a living repossessing bank collateral in the form of motor vehicles. As you can probably guess, most people I deal with are not happy to see me. For some background, I'm not your typical repo man by looking at me. Most guys I work with are over 6'3" and 200 to 300 pounds, bald, with a beard. I know it sounds specific, but it really holds true in my experience. I, on the other hand, am only 5'11", 155 pounds, not bald, but I do have the beard. I was working during the day and checking a retail location for a vehicle I'd been searching for. The address I was checking was located in a large mall area. I glanced in my rearview mirror to see a red Ford Focus behind me. He made a few of the same turns that I did, but I didn't think twice about it. After the 7th or 8th turn that he mimicked, I decided to pull into a parking spot. I figured he would either move on or come talk to me if that was his goal. I noticed he was on the phone in my rear view. I parked the truck and watched the cars that parked about 50 feet from me. Okay, fine. I noticed the man driving the Focus was staring and pointing at me as he spoke on the phone, so I decided to ask what his deal was. When I approached, he got out of his vehicle, which was alarming, so I backed off and didn't get any closer. I leaned my head out of my open window and said, "Sir, is there a reason that you're following me?" He moves his phone from his ear, covering the microphone, and yells,
"Yes, you're harassing people on private property. The cops are on their way."
I told him that was fine, and I would wait around to speak to the police. He yelled some more unintelligible nonsense as I put my window up and sat pretty, waiting for the police. A few minutes later, a cruiser shows up behind me. The officer approached my window, and we spoke about the situation. I told him that I'm permitted on private property unless I'm explicitly asked to leave by someone who owns the property or works security, which he agreed with. Long story short, the police told me I was good to go and asked that I not engage the man as I left. I complied and planned to move on with my day. About 20 minutes after all of this, I glanced in my rear view to see the same Focus driving a couple cars behind me. So I parked again out of frustration. I immediately exited my truck and lit a cigarette. The man driving the car screeched up beside me and exited his car without putting it in park, rather putting it in neutral. As his car begins to roll away, he's turned away from it, screaming at me about violating his right to privacy and harassing the public at this mall. I calmly told him that I was already cleared by the PD and that I was losing patience. I told him he needed to leave right then, before I called the police. It was at this point that his vehicle struck the concrete base of a light pole and stopped. He started screaming and saying that I crashed his car. I told him I had dash cam footage that would negate that claim, and that's when he charged me. Now, remember, I'm not a big guy, but I have dealt with plenty of confrontation at this job, and this guy was not very well coordinated at all. I stepped out of his path and guided him to the ground, telling him to stay down while I leave and to leave me alone. I got in my truck and left. Looking back, I absolutely should have called the police again, as I've got an officer's cell phone number and badge number. This story all comes to head 2 nights later in a bizarre turn of events that genuinely scared me. At this time, I had just gotten married to my lovely wife, and we were living in our little 1-bedroom in our hip little suburb of a major Midwest city. It was a Friday night, and I decided I would go grab some beers for the wife and I to enjoy after a long week. As I was leaving the store with our booze, I saw a maroon Ford Focus in the parking lot, seemingly unoccupied. I made a mental note of the coincidence, given the bizarre ordeal a couple days prior, but didn't think much more of it. As I pulled into my apartment's parking lot, the Focus pulled in behind me. I hadn't noticed that it had followed me up until this point. I live on the 3rd floor, so I decided I was going to hustle up the steps just in case this was the same guy, and he'd stalked me or something in order to exact his revenge for whatever perceived transgression I'd bothered him with. My plan didn't work. He followed me to my patio where my wife was waiting. Again, unbeknownst to me, I was apparently not feeling very observant that night. That's when this motherfucker snuck up, crouching behind our small fence. Neither of us knew he was there until he said, still hidden from view,
"Pretty girl."
I snapped to my feet and began to look around, and I spotted him. I knew instantly it was him. I immediately ordered my wife to go inside, lock the door, and call the police. When I approached him, he drew a small switchblade and pointed at my belly. I began to back up with my hands up, saying something along the lines of, "We don't have to do this. What do you want?" He told me that he had wanted me to call my wife back outside, but of course that wasn't going to happen. I'd rather be stabbed than expose her to this man, so I told him as much. He lunged at me with the knife, grazing and cutting my side as I attempted to grab and redirect his forearm. Then he went to the ground, where he lost his knife. I got some knees to connect to his head when the police lights became visible and I heard shouting. Long story short, Buddy was arrested on site, and I provided the badge number and PD of the officer from work a couple days prior in order to corroborate my claims. I decided to press charges, and as far as I know, he's awaiting a court date. I'm sure I'll have to be involved in it. So, crazy stalker guy, don't fuck with my wife, and let's not meet again. Hey Scaredy Cats, thanks for watching. Feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you'll never miss out on any of the stories. If you have any stories that you'd like for me to read, you can find the links for submissions in the description below.